Hey Facebook, happy Thursday. I got lucky today because I was expecting to be in Hartford all day at the fourth day of Judiciary Committee hearings, and because we were so efficient for the first 3 days of the week, I was actually able to stay home and get some work done here and catch up on a lot of reading and pay some actual bills in addition to reading all the bills coming out of Hartford. But I wanted to catch you up on what has been a really busy week so far. As I mentioned last week, this is Judiciary Week. Our deadline, the JF deadline as it's known, is this Friday. So tomorrow will be our last day of committee meetings, and we will vote the last bills out of the Judiciary Committee. So far, by my quick count, we've voted on 75 bills over 3 days of hearings, and we'll finish that up tomorrow. There's another 30 bills on the agenda for tomorrow, so we'll see how that goes. And I wanted to, first I'm going to run you through some of the bigger bills that we covered this week. I won't take you through all 75, that would take all day. But those are available, and I'll give the links in the newsletter. But I also want to just give you a flavor of how these days go in the Judiciary Committee. Each committee is different and handles different things. Judiciary, because of its nature, covers a wide subject matter. It can affect all kinds of different subjects, but they tend to have pretty important big impacts, and they tend to be big issues that we have to wrestle with. So what we do, we start off each day with a caucus. Each party caucuses separately and goes through the agenda of bills that we're thinking about that particular day. And some of the bills haven't changed since they've been proposed, so you can run through those fairly quickly and get a sense of where people are. Some are so straightforward that they will end up even on a consent agenda, and both parties agree that they are obvious, straightforward fixes to technical problems or unintentional injustices that were caused by bills that we've drafted in the past. So that allows you to limit it to the few bills on each agenda, which are really hard. And those we have, conversations. It's particularly those thorny issues get worked out right in that caucus room, and particularly, this term with strong Democratic majorities in both the House and the Senate. It's this caucus meeting that's really critical, because if we can work our issues out together, and there are many different perspectives even within our caucus, then we can pass the bill with or without support from the other across the aisle. So some of this is issues that get negotiated back and forth between the two caucuses, and some of it's what's happening right in the room in the Democratic caucus. And so we have those conversations that go. We have a quick meeting. First, we run through things. Then we make suggestions to the bills. Some of us sit down and redraft some of the clauses of bills. They go back, get redrafted by the part of the LCO, the Legislative Commissioner's Office, which does the actual drafting, and they give new language. We take a little break. Leadership meets with the Democratic and Republican leadership meets, and so it goes back and forth, and we try to catch up on our email and with one another on various other issues in the room while those conversations are happening outside the room. So the committee meeting doesn't tend to start until the afternoon, 1 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then we vote through the bills, go through the bills one by one, and some of the conversation lasts a long time, and sorry about that. So that's essentially how the day goes, and then it can go quite late into the night, although this year we've been it's been a very productive session, and we haven't had to go too late in the evening. So I just wanted to take you through some of the bills that we actually considered. The first one on Monday you have already undoubtedly heard about, which was the bill, it's 3 bills actually, regarding the legalization of cannabis. The first one, SB 1085, would legalize the retail sale and possession of cannabis, 1.5 ounces or less, and provide for a procedure which could allow people to have their records erased if they have been convicted of an equivalent offense in the past. I posted about this on Facebook at the time. This was a very difficult issue for me, and I, as a result, did a lot of research into it and have decided that on balance, I am in favor of legalization or considering it. I do have some reservations about how we handle the public health aspect of it, and I'll be looking forward to what happens from here is that we have only, in judiciary, we consider just the part of the bill that has to do with the criminal offenses. And then there are two other bills, which I'll cover in a second, which relate to cannabis. But there's the regulatory aspect of this is in the General Law Committee, and then the taxation aspect of it is in the Finance Committee. So those are separate bills that are going to come through their own process, and we'll look at them all together, and I will take a fresh look at the whole package and decide then what I will do. So right now I'm listening to a lot of people and doing a lot of research and speaking with a lot of people in the substance abuse and addiction community with whom I have very strong relationships about data coming out of other states and also the refutation of debunking of a lot of myths that have been in place for a long time. Because one of the challenges about marijuana is that because it remains a Schedule I controlled substance under the federal criminal law, it is very hard to study. And so we have to look at, we have less data to work from than is ideal. And so we have to look at data from other countries, which there is plenty of, but there's not as much in the US. So that was the first bill. We had two other cannabis-related bills. One is the bill that makes it clear that employers do not have to accommodate cannabis use in their employees. So that we wanted to make that crystal clear that we understand, that this can cause safety issues and performance issues for employees, and employers shouldn't have to accommodate that. And the third one, which had very strong bipartisan support, was the driving under the influence, because particularly in our district, we're on the border with Massachusetts. Our law enforcement is already dealing with this, so we need to make it clear what the penalties are for that, and to work on better systems that can allow law enforcement to detect drivers who are driving under the influence, which is indeed a legitimate challenge. We do not have as good processes here as we do with alcohol, but it's already an issue here, which is why it had really strong bipartisan support. So some other issues that we looked at that were thorny ones. Another one was SB 691, which is known as the Clean Slate Bill, and this bill is targeted at basically mass incarceration. We have created a large class of people who, after serving their terms, completing not only their incarceration, but their any probationary sentences, any restitution, debt to the community. Once that's over, we have, as a society, continue to treat them as second-class citizens, and their access to housing is limited, their access to employment can be limited, and it tends to create this creation of a second-class group of people who can't get their way out of that and become productive family members and citizens is a problem for all of us, not just for the formerly incarcerated, but for all of us living in communities from a economic and public safety perspective. And so this bill wrestles with what to do about that. And this bill was working on how and when and if to give the formerly incarcerated a way to erase their criminal record, so that they no longer are, paying penalties for their crime after they have done, served their debt to society. And so it's a work in progress because it's a tricky issue for a lot of reasons, as you can suspect. So this is one of the bills that those of us who stayed in the room, were part of, verbally redrafting and sending ideas to LCO, the Legislative Commissioner's Office, right up to the last minute. And the bill that we passed out of committee essentially gives the formerly incarcerated, after a period of time, right now it's 5 years, not for certain offenses, sexual assault offenses, domestic violence offenses, and some other Class A felonies are exempted from this. But you have a formerly incarcerated person would have the ability to go to the Bureau of Pardons and Paroles and have that bureau demonstrate to them why they wouldn't be entitled to a pardon after a certain period of time. And again, there's a lot of data to suggest that after a period of 5 or 7 years, and that will be in play what that period of time is, the recidivism rates are extremely low. There's a lot of data to suggest actually that even violent criminal activity, people age out of it. And so we need to pay attention to that rather than to continue to exclude them from life in their communities. So I think this was a tough bill, and it certainly it didn't get support from the other side of the aisle, so we had to work it out ourselves. But I think the compromise that we put forward, which allows for a process rather than making it automatic, I think is a good balance. But there's going to be a lot of conversation going forward and possibly changed language to that. Some other quick bills that we passed a bill, SB 880, which will drastically increase fairness and transparency in the criminal justice system, making sure that we collect certain data on each case so that we can track what's happening and who we are. Is our system fair? Are we treating everybody the same? And right now we don't have good data on that. And so this is that's a strong move forward. We also had a bill about solitary confinement. One of the challenges about solitary confinement is that it's not always, sometimes it's used for punishment, but sometimes it's used for safety, particularly when you have young inmates. And so it may seem like it's for their protection, but regardless of the intent of putting this person in that solitary confinement for 23 hours a day, the results are very similar and crushing. And how we can lock people up in those circumstances and then expect them to return to society and behave in a normal way is a bit of a stretch. So this bill seeks to limit the use of solitary confinement by whatever name as much as possible. And it is another bill that is a work in progress. But I think should have, at least for now, has pretty good bipartisan support. So we'll see how it moves forward. A third bill that we also wrote and rewrote right up until the time to start the committee meeting is called SB 3, which is otherwise known as the Time's Up Act. This bill has been worked on for many years in many forms by advocates for the sexual assault victims and domestic violence victims, and who have tirelessly worked on this. Particularly Senator May Flexer, who is on the Judiciary Committee, has been working on this, and I have been participating outside of the legislative system in this in my role at Women's Support Services in Sharon, a domestic violence agency. So I'm really pleased to see this move forward, but again, as with criminal justice issues, they're always thorny, and we were not going to get much support on the other side of the aisle, so we had to work out our issues in our own caucus. And what the bill does is provides, it goes after sexual harassment in the workplace and requires training for all businesses that employ more than 3 employees, and provides for fines if you don't do that. And clarifies protections for people who report it and generally strengthens and improves that system. It also changes the statute of limitations for sexual assault crimes. And for sexual assault crimes against minors, it eliminates the criminal statute of limitations entirely. And we know a lot now about how long it takes some of these victims to be able to come forward for a variety of reasons. And so I think that's a really important move forward for those victims. It also it eliminates some of the statute of limitations for crimes against adults as well, although that varies depending on the nature of the event or the crime and how, the specifics of how it's committed. But it does it lengthens all the statutes of limitation so that people have, to be clear, a statute of limitation that's the period of time in which, from the event, the alleged crime, when it took place, how long you have to bring a cause of action against it and accuse somebody of a crime. And we have those for good reason, because we want our system to encourage people to bring charges in a timely way, because we do want people on both, to be able to defend themselves and not have a charge held over them for their whole life when they've moved on and dealt with, their issues. So there is a strong criminal justice interest in having a statute encouraging people to file. But in these particular cases where we know from the data how hard it is to bring these cases and how buried these things are, and how as a society we have not tended to honor those victims, we need to provide extra safeguards for them. So I'm very happy that we could support a bill that moves that forward. In that similar vein, we also passed a bill that allows for housing protections for victims of sexual assault, to get their locks changed and things like that. So lots of tough conversations this week, lots of thorny issues, but I think we moved a lot of good bills forward, some of which will continue to change before we vote on the House or Senate floors, but I think are good steps in the right direction. I did manage to do one or two other things this week than in addition to sitting in Judiciary Committee meetings. In Kent, I got together with a lot of people from Kent because there on Saturday, a regional Republican group hired a very controversial activist who has a background from in a group that is sort of known by the ADL classifies them as the largest anti-Muslim hate group in the country, and so somebody with that kind of background drew a lot of concern, and so we wanted to show up and express that we support the Muslim community in Kent and elsewhere, and generally show our values of inclusion and tolerance, and that diversity as a community is a strength and improves us all rather than exclusion and fear. So that was nice to see a lot of people out on what turned out to be a very beautiful day. So in many ways. Monday was also Tourism Day in Hartford, and I snuck out of the judiciary meetings from time to time when there was downtime so that I could attend the Tourism Caucus, where a lot of our regional tourism and arts and culture leaders were able to be there. That's a very important part of our community, both culturally and economically, and there's a lot that we can do to support them. And so it was nice to see them in the Capitol and to learn about how we can work together to improve all the good work that they do. And then also this week, I did attend a very exclusive art exhibit in Torrington, where I was given a private tour by one of the artists whose work was being shown. A lot of the artists actually showed up to show their work, which was actually at the Torrington Child Care Center. And I got a fabulous tour of all the beautiful things on the wall of the Child Care Center. And I even got to do a sit down with a couple of the kids and do a jigsaw puzzle. And they finally had to kick me out when it was time for recess. And teachers gently reminded me that maybe I had to go to work. So I did. But it was a really great time to start the day and a really positive moment. So again, we have one more judiciary hearing tomorrow, and then the deadline passes, and then we go back to budget. So I imagine that will be the topic of the future conversations, and lots to talk about there as well. Obviously, there's a lot happening on that front. So thanks for tuning in, and I'm now going to go walk my dog because it's still light outside. Have a great weekend and week. See you next week.